call came in at 5:47 a.m., a jarring digital scream that cut through the pre-dawn quiet of my apartment. The display on the government-issued phone glowed with the cold, impersonal light of duty. Anonymous tip. Possible undocumented nationals. For me, Senior Agent Marcus Kyler, it was just another Tuesday. Another day on the front lines of a war nobody saw, fought in the quiet suburban streets of Los Angeles. 10 years in immigration and customs enforcement teaches you that there are no routine flags, but it also teaches you to suppress the adrenaline, to turn it into a low, steady hum of vigilance. It becomes a job, a process, a series of boxes to be checked. You go in, you cuff, you transport, you process. You don't ask questions, you don't get involved. You just enforce the law. It's clean, it's simple. We hit the house at 6:30, a coordinated entry with 3 other agents, our dark SUVs gliding to a stop with practiced silence. The house was a small, unassuming bungalow in Van Nuys, the kind with a patchy lawn and a peeling paint job, indistinguishable from 100 others on the block. The door splintered with a single brutal kick, the sound of wood and metal tearing apart. The shouts of ICE, police, don't move, echoed through the small, cramped rooms, and the familiar scene of chaos and fear unfolded like a play I'd seen 1,000 times. People scrambling, trying to hide in closets, under beds, their faces a mask of pure terror. The smell of stale tortillas, sweat, and fear hung heavy in the air. It was a numbers game. We rounded them up, a mix of men and women, mostly young, all with the same wide, frightened eyes, the same look of resignation that said the fight was over. And then I saw her. She was in the back bedroom, a space barely large enough for a mattress on the floor and a small, rickety crib. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't running. She was just standing there, a silent statue of defiance and terror, her body positioned between us and the crib where a baby was sleeping, miraculously undisturbed by the noise. She was maybe 30, with dark, tired eyes that held the weight of sleepless nights and a deep, gnawing worry. Her hands were worn, the hands of someone who worked, but she stood with a strange, quiet dignity. She was holding a worn, faded blue backpack, clutching its straps so tightly her knuckles were white, as if it were a life preserver in a stormy sea. It was the only thing in the room she seemed to care about, the only thing she was trying to protect besides the child. "Ma'am, step away from the crib," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It's a voice I've cultivated over a decade, a tool to keep the job from touching me. You can't let emotion into this. It will eat you alive. She didn't move, just shook her head slightly, a silent, desperate plea that I ignored. My partner, a younger, more aggressive agent named Davis, moved to grab her arm. I put a hand on his chest, stopping him. "I got this," I muttered. Davis was all muscle and procedure, a bull in a china shop. I looked at the woman, my eyes cold, my face a mask of indifference. "Your papers," I said in Spanish, the words automatic, worn smooth from use. "Passport. Visa." She just shook her head again, her eyes welling up, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She whispered something I couldn't hear, something lost in the noise of the raid. It didn't matter. The answer was clear. She was illegal. Another number, another body to process. I pulled out a set of plastic zip-tie cuffs, the sound of the plastic ratcheting tight, making its familiar final sound. As I led her out of the room, she kept looking back, not at the house, not at the other people being led away, but at that worn blue backpack I had placed on a small table. Even then, in that moment of procedural chaos, I felt a flicker of something, a question, a spark of curiosity in the ashes of my cynicism. Why was she so obsessed with that bag? I had no idea that in a few hours, the contents of that simple bag would detonate a bomb in the middle of my carefully constructed world. shattering everything I thought I knew about the line I had sworn to defend. If you believe that every person has a story that goes deeper than the surface, that the line between right and wrong is sometimes blurred into a confusing, heartbreaking gray, then take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the Border Files. We bring you the stories from the front lines of immigration that you won't see on the nightly news. Trust me, what I found in that woman's bag will make you question everything you think you know. Now let's get back to that processing center, where the truth was about to come out, whether I wanted it to or not. My world is made of concrete and steel, and the smell of disinfectant. The ICE processing center in downtown LA is a place where humanity is stripped away, replaced by file numbers, legal statutes, and the cold, hard reality of the law. For 10 years I'd walked these halls and felt nothing. It was a fortress I had built around myself, brick by brick, with every arrest, every deportation, every family separated. I came from a family of cops. My father was LAPD. My grandfather was LAPD. We saw the world in black and white, good guys and bad guys, legal and illegal. It was simple. It was clean. When I joined ICE after a short stint in the Marines, it was with that same black and white mindset. I was defending the border, upholding the law, protecting the country. I saw the flow of illegal immigration not as a collection of human stories, but as a tide of problems, crime, drugs, a strain on our resources, a threat to our way of life. And over time, I had let that view harden into a shell of cynicism. To me, they were all the same, just different shades of the same problem. The woman from the bungalow, now designated detainee number 734, was no different. Her name, I learned from her intake form, which she filled out with a hand that trembled slightly, was Elena Morales. No papers, no visa, no legal right to be in the country. In my mind, the story was already written, a script I'd read 1,000 times. She came here for a better life, worked an under-the-table job, cleaning houses or washing dishes, sent money home to a family in some dusty village in Mexico or Central America. Maybe she had a kid to anchor herself here, a child born on U.S. soil to complicate the deportation process. It was the same story, over and over. I had become numb to it, immune to the tears and the pleas. As she was led to a holding cell, a small concrete room with a metal bench, she turned to me, her eyes pleading. She asked me one question, her voice trembling, but her English surprisingly clear, almost unaccented. "My bag," she said, her voice cracking. "The blue one. Please. It is important. It has everything." "All personal effects are processed and stored according to protocol," I replied, my voice the same monotone I used for everyone, a wall of procedure. "You'll get it back if and when you are released," which we both knew meant never. She was on a fast track for deportation, a straightforward case. She would be on a bus back to Mexico within 48 hours. Her face fell, a look of such profound, soul-crushing despair that it almost broke through my armor. Almost. Just another Tuesday, I told myself, as I walked to the processing room where the detainee's belongings were being cataloged and inventoried. Her blue backpack was sitting on a stainless steel table, looking small and insignificant under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was old, the fabric frayed at the seams, one of the zippers broken, a small keychain of a cartoon character attached to it. It looked like something a high school student would carry, not a criminal, not an illegal. "Find anything good in that one, Kyler?" Davis asked, smirking as he sorted through another man's wallet, pulling out a few crumpled dollar bills and a faded picture of a family. "Probably full of fake IDs and sob stories. Or maybe just dirty laundry." "Probably," I said, my voice betraying none of the strange curiosity I was feeling, a curiosity I hadn't felt in years. I placed the bag on the table and began the routine process of inventory, my hands moving on autopilot. It felt heavier than it looked, weighted down with something more than just clothes. I unzipped the main compartment, my mind already expecting the usual. A change of clothes, some cheap jewelry, maybe some hidden cash tucked away. But that's not what I found. What I found made me stop. My hands froze, my breath caught in my chest. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt that fortress around me begin to crack, a fissure running through the stone. The first thing I pulled out was a book. Not a novel, not a magazine, but a thick, heavy medical textbook, its cover worn, its corners bent. Gray's Anatomy for Students, 4th edition. The spine was cracked from use, the pages dog-eared and filled with handwritten notes in a neat, precise script, complex diagrams circled, passages highlighted in yellow and pink. Strange. I pushed it aside and reached back in. My fingers closed around something hard and metallic, cold to the touch. I pulled it out. It was a surgical instrument, a DeBakey forceps, the kind used for delicate cardiovascular procedures, for grasping tissue without crushing it. It was sterilized and sealed in a blue plastic pouch. Then I pulled out another, and another. A full set of specialized microsurgical tools, gleaming under the sterile lights of the processing room, each one in its own pouch. My heart started beating a little faster, a nervous, unfamiliar rhythm. "What the hell is that?" Davis asked, walking over to look, his cynical smirk fading into a look of confusion. "She a back alley doctor or something? Maybe she does illegal plastic surgery for the cartels." I didn't answer. My hands were shaking slightly as I reached into a side pocket of the bag, a pocket I hadn't noticed before. I pulled out a thick manila folder, bulging with documents. It was organized, tabbed, professional. The first document I pulled out was a diploma, printed on heavy parchment paper, embossed with a gold seal that caught the light. It was from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, one of the most prestigious universities in Latin America, the Harvard of Mexico. The name on the diploma was Dr. Elena Morales. The degree, Doctor of Medicine, with a specialty in pediatric cardiovascular surgery. My breath caught in my throat. I read it again, thinking it must be a mistake, a forgery. I flipped through the rest of the documents, my hands moving faster now. Transcripts showing a perfect grade point average, straight A's in some of the most difficult medical courses imaginable. Awards for academic excellence, for research, for clinical performance. Published articles in peer-reviewed medical journals, papers with titles like Novel Approaches to Aortic Arch Reconstruction in Neonates and The Morales Flap, a new technique for ventricular septal defect repair. There were letters of recommendation from world-renowned surgeons praising her skill, her dedication, her brilliant mind. There were photographs of her in surgical scrubs, her face tired but smiling, surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses in a state-of-the-art operating room. There was even a picture of her shaking the hand of the President of Mexico, accepting an award for her humanitarian work with underprivileged children in rural areas. This wasn't a dishwasher. This wasn't a field hand. This wasn't a house cleaner. This was one of the top pediatric heart surgeons in her country, a rising star in her field. "No way," Davis whispered, his usual bravado gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He picked up one of the published articles, his eyes scanning the complex medical terminology. "This has to be fake. It's all fake. It has to be. People like this don't end up in a bungalow in Van Nuys." But I knew it wasn't fake. You can't fake this level of detail. The feel of the paper, the official seals, the complexity of the medical articles, the sheer volume of it all. My mind was reeling, trying to connect the woman in the holding cell, detainee number 734, The quiet, frightened woman with the worn-out clothes, with the brilliant, celebrated surgeon in these documents. The two images didn't compute. It was like trying to solve an equation that had no answer, like looking at two different people. I walked back to the holding area, the folder in my hand, my feet feeling heavy, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and a dawning, terrible understanding. I stood in front of her cell. She was sitting on the metal bench, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking slightly. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red-rimmed but no longer crying, just filled with a deep, hollow emptiness. "Dr. Morales," I asked, my voice sounding strange in my own ears, hesitant, respectful. She flinched at the name, a flicker of fear and surprise in her eyes, like a cornered animal. Then she just nodded slowly, a single, weary acknowledgement. "My son," she said, her voice barely a whisper, so quiet I had to lean closer to the bars to hear. "His name is Mateo. He is 6 months old. He was born with a condition called tetralogy of Fallot, with pulmonary atresia. It's a complex congenital heart defect. 4 separate problems. He needs surgery, a full repair. An operation that can only be performed here, in this country, by a specific surgeon at UCLA who pioneered the technique. We were on a waiting list for a medical visa. It was denied. They said we didn't have sufficient proof that we would return to Mexico. They said we were a flight risk." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not an illegal immigrant, not a detainee, but a mother. A desperate, terrified mother. "I'm a surgeon," she said, her voice gaining a bit of strength, a bit of the authority I'd seen in her photographs. "I know what will happen if he doesn't have this surgery. His blood is not getting enough oxygen. He will die. It is not a question of if, but when. Weeks, maybe a month. So I did what any mother would do. I gave up my career, my home, everything. I came here. I took a job cleaning houses to save money. I was trying to get a consultation, to show them his records, to beg them to save my son. Everything you need to save him is in that bag." And then it all clicked into place, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. The surgical tools weren't for her to use. They were a symbol of who she was, a desperate proof of her identity, a plea to be seen as a colleague, not a criminal. The textbook was her Bible, her source of knowledge. The documents were her testament, her plea for help. She wasn't running from the law. She was running toward a miracle, toward the only person on earth who could save her child's life. I stood there, the cold steel bars of the cell between us, and I felt the fortress I had built around myself for 10 years crumble into dust, the stones falling away one by one. The black and white world I had lived in, the world of good and bad, legal and illegal, suddenly exploded into a million shades of gray, a world of impossible choices and heartbreaking realities. This wasn't a criminal. This was a hero, a mother fighting for her child's life with the only weapons she had, her knowledge, her history, and a desperate, unshakable love that knew no borders. I looked at the folder in my hands, at the picture of the smiling doctor, then at her face, the face of a desperate mother, and I knew that my life and hers had just changed forever. I had a choice to make, a choice that wasn't in any manual, that wasn't covered by any regulation. I could follow the letter of the law, process her, and send her and her dying son back to Mexico to face a certain death. Or I could do something else, something that might cost me my job, my career, my pension, everything I had worked for. For the first time in a decade, I didn't know what to do. I was an agent of the law, but I was also a human being, and the two were suddenly at war. I spent the next hour in my office, the door closed, the documents spread across my desk like the pieces of a shattered life. I made a few calls, my hands shaking so much I could barely dial. First, a discreet inquiry to a contact at the State Department, a guy who owed me a favor. He confirmed it all. Dr. Elena Morales was a national treasure in Mexico, a rising star. Then a search in the medical databases I had access to through our agency's connections. Everything she said was true. Her publications, her awards, her specialty. She was who she said she was. Davis came to my office, knocking softly on the door. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked, his voice quiet, respectful. The cynical smirk was gone, replaced by a look of concern. "The supervisor is asking for her processing file. We're supposed to put her on the bus for the detention center this afternoon. The bus leaves at 1500 hours. I looked at the picture of Elena accepting her award, her face beaming with pride and intelligence. Then I looked at the picture of her baby, Mateo, from a small worn photo I found tucked into the textbook. He was a beautiful baby, with his mother's dark eyes, but his skin had a faint bluish tint, a telltale sign of cyanosis, of oxygen-starved blood. I thought about the law. I thought about my oath to uphold it. And then I thought about what it meant to be human, what it meant to be a parent. "Buy me some time," I said to Davis, my voice hoarse. "Lose her file for an hour. Create a mix-up. Spill coffee on it. I don't care how you do it. Just give me an hour." He just nodded and left. He understood. Even he, in his cynicism, understood that this was different. I picked up my phone and made one more call. It was to a number I hadn't called in years, a number I kept for emergencies. A number for a man I once arrested, a high-powered immigration lawyer who had gotten off on a technicality, and who, for some reason, felt he owed me a favor. "Mr. Chen," I said when he answered, his voice sharp and impatient. "Agent Kyler, I need your help, off the record, and I need it now." I laid out the whole story, my voice low and urgent. He was silent for a long time, so long I thought he'd hung up. "This is career suicide, Kyler," he finally said, his voice grave. "You know that, right? You could go to jail for obstructing a federal investigation, for aiding and abetting. They will throw the book at you." "I know," I said, my voice steady now. "But what's the alternative? Send a baby home to die? What's the law for that? What's the procedure for that?" He sighed, a long, weary sound. Okay. Here's what we do. There's a provision in the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 212D5, humanitarian parole. It's a long shot, almost never granted. It's for urgent humanitarian reasons. But if we can get a sponsoring institution, a hospital, and a lead surgeon to petition on her behalf, we might have a chance. A 1 in a million chance. But it's a chance. UCLA Medical Center, I said immediately. The surgeon is Dr. Marcus Albright. Chen laughed, a dry, humorless sound that crackled over the phone. "Albright, you're aiming for the top, I'll give you that. He's a god in his field. He has a 2-year waiting list. He doesn't take calls from people like us. He doesn't deal with lawyers, let alone ICE agents." "He will today," I said, a new kind of determination in my voice, a fire I hadn't felt in years. "I'm a federal agent. I'll get him on the phone. Just be ready." And I did. It took me another hour, a lot of yelling, and flashing my badge number to a half-dozen terrified receptionists and assistants who tried to block me. But I got him. Dr. Albright was annoyed, his voice sharp and impatient, the voice of a man who didn't have time for interruptions. "This better be a matter of national security, Agent," he snapped, his voice clipped. "It's a matter of a child's life, Doctor," I replied, my voice steady. I told him the story, quickly, efficiently. I mentioned Mateo's condition, the specific diagnosis. He was unimpressed. He had a year-long waiting list of patients from all over the world, all with heartbreaking stories. Then I played my last card, the only one I had. The boy's mother is a surgeon, I said, my voice dropping. Dr. Elena Morales from Mexico City. The line went silent. I could hear the change in the atmosphere, even over the phone. The impatience was gone, replaced by a stunned, electric silence. Elena Morales. Albright's voice was different now, filled with a kind of academic excitement and disbelief. The one who published the paper on aortic arch reconstruction in neonates. The one who developed the Morales flap technique for VSD repair. The same, I said, my heart pounding against my ribs. My God, Albright whispered, his voice filled with awe. She's a genius. A prodigy. I've been following her work for years. I tried to recruit her for a fellowship 2 years ago, but she turned it down. I couldn't understand why. Where is she? I need to speak with her. I need to meet her. That's the problem, Doctor, I said, taking a deep breath, the final leap. She's in my custody. She's a federal detainee, scheduled for deportation this afternoon. The silence on the other end of the line was heavier than a tombstone, filled with unspoken outrage. When Albright spoke again, his voice was cold steel, the voice of a man used to giving orders and being obeyed without question. Not if I have anything to say about it. Get her and that child to my hospital. Now. I will handle the rest. I will call my lawyers. I will call the university chancellor. I will call the governor if I have to. You have my word. Just get them here. The next few hours were a blur of controlled chaos, a high-wire act without a net. I was breaking a dozen regulations, risking my entire career on the word of a doctor I'd never met. I signed out detainee number 734 and her infant son, not for transport to a detention center, but for a medical emergency, a lie that would surely be discovered, a lie that would end my career. I drove them myself in my unmarked government vehicle, not to the bus station where a bus was waiting to take them to the border, but to the gleaming glass towers of the UCLA Medical Center, a place of healing and hope. When we arrived, Dr. Albright was waiting for us at the emergency entrance, flanked by a team of nurses and residents. He wasn't what I expected. He was young, maybe 40, energetic, with kind eyes that held a fierce intelligence. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were locked on Elena. Dr. Morales, he said, extending a hand, his voice filled with respect and admiration. It is an honor to finally meet you. I'm so sorry it is under these circumstances. Elena, who had been silent and terrified the entire ride, her face a mask of despair, looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of hope ignited in her eyes, a tiny flame in the darkness. She shook his hand. Dr. Albright, thank you. Thank you for seeing us. They took Mateo immediately, rushing him to the pediatric ICU, a team of specialists descending on him. Albright and Elena walked side by side, speaking in a rapid-fire language of medical terminology that I couldn't understand, a language of acronyms and procedures and drug dosages. Two brilliant minds from different worlds, united by a single purpose: to save a child's life. I was left standing in the hallway, a ghost in a world I didn't belong to, my badge suddenly feeling heavy and useless in my pocket. The fallout was immediate and brutal. By the time I got back to the office, my supervisor was waiting for me, his face purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his temple. I was suspended, my badge and weapon confiscated on the spot. An internal investigation was launched. I was facing charges of obstruction of justice, of aiding and abetting an illegal alien, of violating my oath. My black and white world had come crashing down, and I was buried in the rubble. But I didn't care. For the first time in 10 years, I had made a choice not based on a law, but on a life. The story, of course, leaked. A nurse at the hospital told a friend, who told a reporter. The ICE agent and the surgeon. It became a local sensation, then a national one. I was painted as both a hero and a traitor, depending on which news channel you watched, which side of the political divide you were on. 2 weeks later, Matteo had his surgery. It was a marathon, 12 hours long, a delicate, complex procedure that involved rebuilding his tiny heart. Dr. Albright led the team, but he insisted that Elena be in the operating room, not as a surgeon, but as a consultant, as a mother. She was there when her son's heart was stopped, and she was there when it was started again, beating strong and steady and pink for the first time in his short life. He survived. He thrived. I was eventually cleared by the internal review, thanks to a mountain of legal pressure from the hospital and a personal call from Dr. Albright to the director of ICE, a call that apparently involved a lot of shouting and threats of a media firestorm. But I couldn't go back. The job wasn't the same. The lines were no longer clear. I resigned a month later, turning in my badge for good. 6 months after that, I visited them at the small apartment the hospital had arranged for them near the campus. Elena had been granted a special visa, a U visa for victims of crime who cooperate with law enforcement, and then a more permanent one sponsored by UCLA, where she was now a visiting scholar, a fellow on Dr. Albright's team, her skills too valuable to lose. She was no longer detainee number 734. She was Dr. Morales, a respected colleague, a brilliant surgeon, a mother. She opened the door, and her face broke into a wide, genuine smile. "Agent Kyler," she said, her voice warm. "Please, come in." "It's just Kyler now," I said, smiling back. In the living room, a healthy, happy baby was sitting on a playmat, gurgling and laughing, chasing a brightly colored ball. His skin was pink, his eyes bright, his energy boundless. He was perfect. I looked at him, then at Elena, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years, a sense of rightness. I spent 10 years of my life building walls, both literally and figuratively. I saw the world as a fortress to be defended, a series of lines to be held. But one mother, with nothing but a worn-out blue backpack and a love that defied borders and laws, taught me that some bridges are worth building, no matter the cost. The law is written in black and white, but life, real life, is lived in the gray. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is step across the line, not to enforce a law, but to uphold a higher one, the law of humanity.